Welcome. We will be talking about the effective solution to promote food and nutrition security. We have been hearing this morning and during the introductory speeches this afternoon that we are hearing a lot about climate-smart agriculture these days as a potential solution to fight climate change, but also to promote food security, so fight food insecurity. We have also listened Pascal Durand and Philippe Barrette talking about agroecology as another potential solution to fight these two battles. So this panel is about defining what is modernity, what are the solutions to fight these challenges. So we have four panelists. So we have Bharati Joshi from Care India. She's the technical director of the Economic Development Unit. We have Cristina Tirado. She's a moderator of the UN Working Group on Nutrition and Climate Change. We have Pablo Tittonell, professor and chair of the Farming System Ecology Group at the Wageningen University. And we have Teresa Anderson, who is a policy officer on climate and resilience at Action Aid International. So, without further comments, I will give Pablo the floor on agroecology, and I will just ask you to explain us the difference between agroecology and climate-smart agriculture, so that everybody is on the same page. And maybe why do you think that agroecology could be a potential solution for these important battles? Thank you.
Does it work like this? Great. Oh, it's a bit further away. Well, good afternoon, everyone. While I go back in the slides, so you can already see what's going to come. I'm happy to be here and discussing with civil society these issues, which in science also bring a lot of debates, as you can imagine. And then I'm going to talk about agroecology in particular and the potential of agroecology for food security. And I'd like to say that beyond my let's say, affiliations as they are on the screen, I also I'm also a member of the Latin American Society for Agroecology, which is one of the ones that started earliest with these kind of discussions. So agroecology is a term that is, as you heard already, used in different ways by different people. But actually agroecology was already mentioned in scientific literature in the 30s, to talk about the ecology of crops and animals in a farming environment. Now, later on, it became a practice. So many farmers started practicing agroecology around the world. And finally, it became a social movement, a movement which is very important. And it is actually that movement, that social organization, what accounts for the spread of agroecology. We normally say that the social movement is the kind of the medium on which agroecology spreads. There is no government, except perhaps the government of Brazil, that is actively promoting agroecology, and yet agroecology is expanding very, very quickly in many parts of the world, and certainly in Latin America. And organizations, big research organizations, national organizations like INRA in France and INTA in Argentina, are taking the challenge of agroecology and say, well, okay, beyond agroecology being a movement for family farming, for smallholder farmers, we can also perhaps use the principles of agroecology to also design more sustainable systems for commercial farmers, for large-scale farming. Now, what is agroecology then? Agroecology is the use of concepts and principles of ecology for the management, for the design and the management of agricultural systems. Now, nowadays, we don't talk about agricultural systems anymore. We talk about food systems, right, in general. And those principles are principles which are basically ecological principles, things that describe how an ecosystem functions, right? So we try to reproduce those functions of the ecosystem in the agroecosystem. That's the principle. On the other hand, we have other different definitions like climate-smart agriculture, sustainable intensification of agriculture, et cetera, et cetera. And in the particular case of climate-smart agriculture, which is what occupies us today, we see, they use actually targets, not principles, to define agriculture, right? And I think that's perhaps an epistemological difference. And sorry, because I'm a teacher as well. But if you look at climate-smart agriculture, it's defined as what needs to happen, and not how, right? And that resides the major difference between agroecology and climate-smart agriculture. And particularly on this term here, which is sustainability, right? So these are the three pillars, or the three targets of climate-smart agriculture: are produce sustainably, adapt to climate change, and contribute to mitigation. Now, the question is, how do we define sustainability? Well, and that's where the whole discussion is. And particularly because sustainability is not a hard target, like you say, well, reduce hunger, or reduce poverty rates below 15%. That could be a hard target. But sustainability is a soft target, a target that is difficult to define in terms of thresholds, right? Now, we heard already, we know we're producing enough when we look at calories, when we look at nutrition, when we look at particular food items in the world, we're not producing enough of many of those things. And it's also the nuances of diets. But I mean, the problem is where that production takes place, right? If we look at the most productive areas of the world, like, for instance, the American Corn Belt is a highly productive area in the world. Produces 18 tons of maize, which is really high. Well, actually, that's where food is produced. And, for example, southern Malawi could be one of the places where food is demanded, right? You can increase your production in the American Corn Belt, but you're not even going to reach those who need it in southern Malawi, right? Just to take one example. And why? Well, because there are many demands for that maize produced in the Corn Belt, right? By the industry, by the biofuels, by different things. So that's just complementing the figures that Philippe Barret gave this morning. Actually, if you take maize, for instance, only 30% of the energy produced in maize is delivered in the food system, right? Delivered to the food system. And from there, you need to start discounting waste, right? But from the total production, only 70% is delivered, because the rest is lost in the conversion to animal products, but also in the industry. So that means that we cannot leave food security in private hands, right? If we let the market allocate that maize, they will not necessarily take it to southern Malawi. We need to act on that. Now, agroecology comes, at least in the way we understand it in Latin America, comes as the science for food production for poor people in marginal environments, which is exactly what we need, in environments that need rehabilitation of land, in environments where people cannot afford other means of producing. So that's how we start with agroecology. And I can understand that in many circles it's a new concept, and there's a lot of confusion on what it is, but this is what it is originally. To produce food where food is necessary. And of course, taking into account the different pillars of food security, that I'm not going to go into that. But let's look at some figures, because I was asked to present evidence, right? And this is an example of why we need to consider climatic variability in general, not necessarily change, because climate has always been variable, right? This is an example that comes from Africa, from Zimbabwe in particular, from sandy soils. And what we see there is, historical data on climate. We see from the 50s, so we see lots of variation. And here is an example of research done to improve soil productivity, produce more food, in particular more maize in those regions, which is basically the major pillar of the recommendations of international research organizations to use fertilizers to improve production. Well, what we do that the first year in this type of soils, I don't know where you should point actually. If we apply 100 kilograms of nitrogen, which is already a lot for a farmer, you get a very little yield. If you put also a little bit of phosphorus, which is another nutrient, also expensive for the farmer, but then you get a bit more yield. And if you put manure, animal manure, then you get a little bit more yield, right? But we're still talking about less than 1 ton per hectare, right? It's really very poor yields. You know? We're asking the farmer to invest all that money in fertilizers and get 1 ton per hectare of yield. Second year, you do the same, you get a little bit more, especially in the ones in which you combine things, right? But the third year, notice the rainfall down there. It's actually not much drier, but it was dry during flowering for maize, and that's a very important moment in which the yield of the maize is being determined. And what we see there is that only the treatment that had organic matter in the soil through manure application is the one that worked. right? So we can't ask farmers to invest for 3 years to restore their soil with fertilizers and place them in that risk. Right? Now, but let's focus on things that work. This is a review that was done, that was published already a couple of years ago, that reviewed a lot of projects in Africa, lots of projects using some form of agroecological principles, integrated pest management, integrated soil fertility management, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And here is a very interesting publication that shows the area of those projects and the yield increasing ratio. So in most projects with different technologies, yields were more than doubled, which means that technically speaking, we have the solutions, right? We don't need to reinvent anything. I mean, we have, of course, that doesn't mean that science has to stop. We can continue progressing and making better use of resources. But with the resources and the knowledge we already have, we can double yields in those critical situations. Right? One example of this, taking local knowledge, ancient knowledge, and use the basis of local knowledge, but with modern techniques to optimize those systems. This is the case of the traditional systems of mixing crops with animals, with livestock, in particular in Southeast Asia, mixing ducks and fish with rice. And when you make these systems more and more complex, you get higher yields of rice, you see, from here to there. But also you get all this, which contributes to nutritional diversity and to income diversity for smallholder farmers. And when you look at the climate effect of putting all that together, you see that, well, these are the devices we use to measure emissions in the field, but what we see is that we compare with the conventional systems using fertilizers, well, and all these complex systems are emitting less than the other, right? And it has to do with the azolla, which is something that grows and cools down the water in the rice, and also the nutritional carrying capacity of these systems. As we know, rice is deficient in vitamin A, right? So when you cultivate only rice, you don't get any vitamin A. But when you cultivate this mix, you can feed up to 30 people with the vitamin A producing 1 hectare, right? So the solution here is not rice enriched in vitamin A, it's a diversification of the entire agricultural systems, which actually was like that before. Now, another example from a place which is really dry, it's a place where it doesn't rain, basically. It is the coastal areas of Peru. And what we see there is that some farmers with little irrigation water they can get, they combine trees and crops and livestock, and not necessarily always cows, no? But livestock anyway. And with the refusal of that, they compost and they produce biogas. And with the effluence of the biogas, they fertilize their soils. And when we measure those soils, we see that the biological diversity in a maize crop is higher than in the natural forest there, you see, just because of human action. So agriculture, I agree with the presenter before, can also be part of the solution. But this is, again, the result of the social movements. This is nothing that comes through any government pushing for agroecology or anything like that. This is a mouth-to-mouth, it's a farmer-to-farmer dissemination process. Right? Brazil is perhaps the only case, as I explained before, in which we have a top-down example of agriculture, or actually conversions of bottom-up and top-down processes. Brazil has a policy for agroecology, and what we see there is that the results are amazing. I mean, they achieved the 2 millennium goals of reducing extreme poverty and reducing hunger, eliminating hunger, and they did that through a program which many of you have known already, the Fome Zero program, which is Zero Hunger. And this program consists of 60 different policies, and in none of those policies you will see anything like increasing yields, right? It's all kinds of policies, and because Brazil is a very diverse country, they deployed those policies taking into account that heterogeneity. They didn't have a one-size-fits-all policy, but policies oriented to the different realities of people.
Pablo, I would just ask you to just...
one more concept, and it's the following. This last slide. So what I'm saying is agroecology has a lot of potential on the technical ground. We can increase yield with many different techniques. We can sequester carbon. We can contribute to adaptation, etc. from the technical point of view. But for it to happen, we need also institutional innovation alongside with it. When I say institutions, I mean everything. I mean also markets. I mean value chains. I mean laws, policies, organization, etc. So if we are in this situation and we want to go there, we don't know. It's not going to be a straight line, but we know it's going to be a bottleneck for sure, right? And Here we can also see how the different discourses align, because the climate-smart agriculture and the sustainable intensification discourses are well-intentioned discourses by some people talking about eco-efficiencies, making a more efficient use of the resources we have in the systems we have today. What we're proposing is actually a redesign of the systems. It's not just about being more sustainable with the monoculture we have, but it's to redesign the system completely. And for that, we need different drivers, and one of the important drivers is the evolution of those social movements to support that change. Right? And of course, policies are also necessary because farmers transitioning this trajectory are also in a vulnerable situation during that bottleneck. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Pablo, for your speech. It shows well that we need to go beyond the triple win approach of climate-smart agriculture that does not help us to define what is sustainability. And I will let Bharati explain us, especially how gender, taking into account gender and equity in our approach in agriculture is really important if we want to achieve a sustainable development. So thank you, Bharati.
Thank you, Aurélie. Yeah, I'll start with sharing of the irony that the single largest class of food insecure households in my country, where I come from, are the food producers. It's a country which sometimes has 80 million tons of food grain stocks, and yet it hosts 27% of the world's malnourished population. So all these figures sort of give strength to the idea which we have been discussing since morning, that food and nutrition security is a complex challenge. And though producing more food, enhancing agricultural productivity and production remain the objectives which are desirous, just increase in agriculture productivity and production will not lead to enhanced food and nutrition security. And this is where CARE's global work with smallholder agriculture comes into play. We have an important component of food and nutrition security in our smallholder agriculture programs, which lays stress on women empowerment. Now, why women? Because we are not just seeing a feminization of agriculture, we are also seeing feminization of poverty and hunger. And it is true in most developing countries of the world. Women are said to produce 60 to 80% of the food in developing countries and about half of global food production. But yet, within the households, they, despite being the food givers, are seen to eat the last, the least, the worst, and in times of chronic food insecurity, not eat at all. So this is the situation which we are trying to address. Gender inequality, especially CARE has been seeing, is particularly pervasive in agricultural systems. Within households, women do not have access to assets, resources. Land is seldom in their names. They cannot take decisions related to household expenditure or savings. So they are lesser beings than men. On the farms, they are not at all recognized as farmers. They continue to be seen as playing roles which are supportive. Agriculture extension systems, private actors, public actors, everybody seems to be performing as per a gender blind mode. They also do not address women. A recent report which has come out from CCAFs clearly shows that the extension needs of women are very different from men. But these realities are not taken into account. These realities are the ones which we also try to incorporate in our work with women smallholders in India. Now, we see that addressing such pervasive gender inequities in agriculture requires an approach which not just aims towards gender equality, it requires a gender transformative approach. So when we say gender transformative approach, we try to address inequities not only just at the household level in the relations that are existing in the households, but try to examine the entire agricultural system and see how its functions, the way it functions, the decision it takes, creates situations which are unfavorable for women. Our work with smallholder agriculturists, women especially, it adheres to our women empowerment framework, which has three main components. We see that it is important to work not just on the agency of the women, that is their skills, capacities, as well as confidence, but also on the structures, the systems which are governing the way women live, the way they take decisions, and also to alter the relations that women have, the relations of power which influence the way women lead their lives within households or in the community. So I'll just share some of the examples of the work which we have been doing. We work with women smallholders in some of the rain deficient states. We have climate change adaptation programs. We work on enhancing the agencies of the women in terms of improving their skills as agriculturists. So the entire system of which seeds to select for particular areas, how to sow, how to reap, all the capacities we try to work with them. We also work on women's capacities to engage with different stakeholders, because women, they suffer from low mobility. Their experience of engaging with the market, whether it is input market or output markets, is very low. So that is an area which requires strengthening. We work through collectives of women in most places, because collectives don't just give us space to build women's solidarity. They are also like a private space for women where they can voice their aspirations, where they can learn together, where they can go to the duty bearers like agriculture extension services or seed providers and demand for their rights. So these approaches we are seeing that they are in fact yielding results. Women farmers who have been provided trainings, exposures, are able to enhance the yields of their paddy by up to 16%. The price realization of their produce, they are also seeing is enhancing up to 20%. There are huge margins that agriculture input providers have been making. But because women are themselves now indenting together and purchasing in bulk, and they are aware of the market information, all the market prices, they are able to bargain for as much as half the prices at which they used to originally purchase the produce. Now these changes are transformative, not just because we are working with women, we also work with men. This means that we are not seeing women as the only bearers of the climate change adaptation responsibility, but we work with men. We have certain tools and techniques, like we engage in gender dialogues. We select champions amongst men who are actually giving space to women, who are working together with women, sharing the chores. And we are seeing that there is an impact, because men have started taking over some of the roles, because we have a do no harm principle. We follow the do no harm principles, where we do not want women to be responsible for more and more external work without seeing that their household workload is reduced. So we are engaging men to take over those roles, to understand the aspirations of women, to see the potential of women. And we feel that by allowing this kind of a process to pursue, we will be able to move towards the goal of food and nutrition security in an equitable way. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Bharati, for your inspiring speech on gender.
Bon, maintenant, d'une approche très technique, c'est pas simplement de donner des clés, mais aussi de donner beaucoup plus d'espace aux paysans pour travailler pour la sécurité alimentaire. Et le côté nutritionnel est très important. Et Chris va nous donner qu'est-ce qu'on pourrait faire pour que nous avons des approches sensibles au climat et qu'est-ce qui est efficace et performant. Merci beaucoup pour l'invitation.
But I know that several organizations, co-organizers here, are giving a lot of importance to nutrition security within the climate context. So I think that during the morning, it has been covered how climate is impacting the different underlying drivers of nutrition through impaired food access and household food access, but also through other drivers that are very important for nutrition security, which include access to care and feeding practices, access to maternal and child health, and access to health and environmental health environments. Undernutrition is a combination of disease, diarrheal diseases, and undernutrition, and these two elements go together. So this is something that I would like to highlight and make sense and keep in mind for the rest of the points that I am going to discuss. Now, what we are seeing is finally the last IPCC report pointed out that the impacts of climate change are already impacting the huge existing burden of malnutrition. And they concluded with high confidence that the main impact of climate change on health is the impact that climate change has on children undernutrition and children development. So this is the conclusion of the last IPCC reports. The main impact is children undernutrition. And this is based in a couple of studies. One of them is showing that with a scenario of climate change, by 2050 we will have 20% more children undernourished. But when we extrapolate this and we go beyond the calories and we look into social indicators, we are seeing that by 2050 we may have an increase of up to 20% of severe stunted growth in sub-Saharan Africa, and more than a 60% more increase of severe stunting in Southeast Asia. So those are major words, and we have to be ready for that. On top, the last IPCC report has been giving information of the decrease of actual nutrients in important staples and crops as CO2 levels increase. So this information is very much available for the US. The US has just released a very interesting work on that. But we don't have this information from developing countries, and we need to know how increased levels of CO2 are impacting the nutrient levels of important staples in developing countries. Despite all this, what is surprising is that we cannot find usually, or with very few exceptions, we cannot find nutrition included in either the food security section or the health section in the national adaptation programs for action. Usually, nutrition is forgotten in both sections. And this is one of the issues that we have to address in a way, because producing more food is not leading to a better nutrition. We have data from Kenya, particularly from Kenya and Philippines, in which the adoption of cash crops has even doubled the income of small farmers. However, children malnutrition has not been improved. Moreover, what we are seeing is, and you were talking about modernization, right? We have seen with a lot of worry that while, the health of traditional Maasai communities has been really good for many years, suddenly these Maasai communities that have adopted these cash crops interventions in order to have, higher incomes and export to Europe. Yes,
sorry, can you speak closer?
Sure, sure. And export these crops to Europe. We have seen that the difference between the modern Maasai and the traditional Maasai is that the modern Maasai were developing problems of obesity and problems of non-communicable diseases, obesity in the mummies, and very, worrisome problems of overweight in children. So, we have to see if introducing these cash crops without any other education or interventions is doing more harm than benefits in terms of nutrition. This is very important. Another issue that I would like to highlight is when we are talking about including or promoting nutrition-sensitive adaptation, I would like to share some examples that do not come from the climate work. They come the other way around, and they are totally climate intelligent, climate smart, climate, friendly, however you want to call it, okay? But they come the other way around. For example, I have been working for 4 years in a project in Salvador called La Ventana. It was funded by the ISC, and it was a project that was designed in principle to decrease children malnutrition. How this was done? This was done through amazing partnerships between the health, the social sector, and the agricultural extension services in El Salvador, in small municipalities in which, they were people that were suffering from huge problems of malnutrition. 50% of the kids were stunted. The mummies were obese. The same mummies of the stunted children were obese, so we were having this problem in the same household. And they were not used to cook. They were not used to grow food. And, they were people that have the lost generation from the guerrilla. And we started a project in which the extension...
Sorry, can you speak closer to the microphone?
Sorry. Where the extension agriculture services were promoting sustainable agriculture and we were promoting the recuperation or reintroduction of traditional seeds, indigenous seeds that were forgotten, and of fruits and vegetables. And the promotion was, one of the tricks was, and one of the added values, it was that they were safe. So that we were like killing 2 birds in one shot. We were promoting fruits and vegetables that are micronutrient rich, but at the same time, since we were promoting food safety in the agriculture systems, we were preventing diarrheal diseases. At the end of the day, we got some systems that were, promoting the very low water use, water conservation, drip irrigation, very low inputs of agriculture because it was not organic, but it was very ecological. And we were shortening the food chains, because of the way of having local production. So to conclude, I just wanted to mention that something that I would like to highlight is to consider the importance of the social protection sector in areas where we don't have any agricultural land, or for poor people in urban areas that they don't have any access to land. All this adaptation in the agriculture sector is useless. So all the social protection interventions that have been working, like conditional cash transfers, like the one of Bolsa Familia in Brazil. Those are conditional cash transfers. You give money usually to the female household with the condition that she gets prenatal care, that she gets postnatal care, that she promotes breastfeeding, that she vaccinates the kids, and that she brings kids to the school. That was the idea of Bolsa Familia in Brazil. There are other programs that on top, because there are countries that need more, they have a program for distribution of foods. And that's one of them. School feeding programs that promote girls' education are critical. And we can discuss this later. And but all these nutrition-sensitive adaptation solutions will not be possible if we don't include nutrition indicators to measure the outcomes. So one of them that has been like the queen of all the indicators is called minimum dietary diversity for women. Has been proposed for the SDGs, and this is something that we would like to promote for Paris and from New York. Thank you.
Thank you. So we have seen that there are flaws in the definition of the climate smart agriculture because there are things missing if we want to really achieve food and nutrition security. But we have not discussed the mitigation pillar of climate smart agriculture, because we were talking about false solution in the climate solution. So Teresa will explain us a bit what could be the potential damages if we just focus on mitigation and we forget the other objectives. So, Teresa, thank you.
Thanks, Aurélie. And thank you to the organisers. Thanks for inviting me. I'm actually really happy to be here because we work a lot as ActionAid on the link between climate and adaptation. We're really doing a lot of work in the build-up to the Paris Summit, so I'm particularly happy to be here with this great audience, so thank you. As I mentioned, ActionAid, we're working on these issues. We actually work in 45 countries, and I personally work on programs to do with adaptation, resilience, disaster risk reduction, agriculture, Agri Ecology, all of that work. And we're trying to, and by working with communities, we really, hope that work, we also work on land grabs as well. And we really hope that the experience from the communities informs our work that we do in the climate negotiations. And so in the UN climate space, we really work a lot on agriculture issues, adaptation, finance, and food security issues, as well as the issue of loss and damage, and also gender issues as well. And just so for those of you that are not familiar with ActionAid International, you may know our country office in France, ActionAid International, is Peuple Solidaire. So we're working very closely with Peuple Solidaire in the months to come. So, and just before I really dive into the piece about the false solutions, because I'm going to revisit some of the issues that were discussed earlier. I also want to underline how effective agroecology is for adaptation to climate change. I was recently in the Gambia talking to families who found that they'd been doing a lot of composting and putting manure and using agroecological techniques, increasing their seed diversity. And last season, the rains came 2 months late and and ended at their normal time. So they only got half the amount of rain. Now, normally it would have been a disaster for them, but they found that they were able to get a yield, their normal yield, because the soil had so much water in it contained because of the compost. So for me, this is one of the key solutions. We don't need to be finding false solutions. We have the answers already. And so when the US and other countries start talking in climate negotiations about the importance of including climate-smart agriculture as a solution, we do get very worried because there are very few or no definitions of what climate-smart agriculture means. Some of you will have heard of this Global Alliance for Climate-Smart Agriculture. And even though civil society really tried to engage very much as this alliance was being set up, we didn't actually manage to get them to agree to any definitions of what climate smart is. No exclusions for what climate smart cannot be. So, although agroecology, as we've talked about, really is actually genuinely smart for the climate, but you also can have GMOs, fertilizers, whatever, also being defining themselves as climate smart. And there's nothing to stop them doing this in the Global Alliance for Climate Smart Agriculture, and this is what really worries us. You may wonder, how can GMOs call themselves climate smart? Well, you have companies like Monsanto who claim that if they have their herbicide-tolerant GM crops and they simply allow the weeds grow up and spray herbicides over everything, then they're reducing tillage and therefore reducing emissions from the soil. So that's climate smart, according to them. And you also have fertilizer companies who say that, well, we've increased our efficiency of production of fertilizers, so we're actually producing slightly fewer emissions per kilo of fertilizer. So that's climate smart. So now, in theory, you can go and promote a fertilizer as climate smart, even though we know that fertilizer production is massively really causes massive greenhouse gas emissions and is also a disaster for the soil in terms of killing the microbes and reducing the water carrying capacity of the soil. And also, when you add fertilizers to the soil, it actually releases nitrous oxide, and that's 300 times worse for the climate as carbon dioxide. So it's like a triple disaster. But that, in theory, could be climate smart. So we have, the Global Alliance for Climate Smart Agriculture has people like, corporations such as Monsanto is considering joining. We have Syngenta, Yara, the world's largest fertilizer company, McDonald's. Perhaps they want to promote hamburgers as a solution to climate change. I don't know what their plan is. But, so this is why we're really skeptical about the climate smart discourse and why we need to really, as was mentioned earlier, pay very close attention to the kind of language that we want to use around the solutions to climate change. And one of the concerns that we have that links to the climate smart discussion is the way that the land sector is now being treated as a mitigation approach. We know that adaptation is very important for agriculture, but now there's increasing talk about how land needs to be used as part of the climate solution. And so some countries, the EU, for example, and others are talking about and very strongly pushing for land use to be included as a mitigation solution in the new climate agreement. And this has both pros and cons. So the pros are that this could help to address issues of deforestation, right? So it's not necessarily totally a bad thing to include land use in the new agreement. However, this could also lead to big loopholes, which could basically lead to more emissions and deforestation. And the other thing is that it could lead to massive land grabs. Now, how can it lead to land grabs? There's other language coming in at the same time called net zero emissions. I hope the translation is working okay to catch these kinds of words. Yeah. So the idea of net zero emissions, what is it? Well, it sounds good, right? We should be going for zero emissions if we want to radically, immediately address climate change. Great. But what's the difference? Net zero sounds like zero emissions, but it's actually quite different. They can mean entirely different things. So zero emissions means actually cutting emissions. In the EU, we actually need to cut perhaps 80% in the next decades, right? Far higher figures than is considered realistic is actually necessary to keep us under 2 degrees Celsius. But and nobody's really talking about the figures that we really need. But what we're now talking about is net zero emissions, which essentially disguises business as usual, increased trajectory of emissions, but then using some kind of negative emission technology, net, to suck those emissions out of the air and make it, neutral or zero overall. So that's what net zero means. So what are these negative emission technologies? These are all mostly going to be land-based. And we're talking about massive, massive areas of land in order to achieve this. How much? Well, the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is like 1,000 or more scientists who got together and reviewed all the science, said that we may need between 1 billion and 6 billion hectares of land to sequester the amount of carbon required to keep us under 2 degrees if we get through this net zero approach. Now, to put this into context, 1.5 billion hectares of land is currently used for crop production globally. And Africa is 3 billion. So we're talking about 2 Africas basically being put over to biomass to solve the climate problem. And of course, this is going to go, it's going to be the South. It's going to be developing countries and particularly marginalized communities, just as we've seen with the biofuel land grab, who are going to be targeted and displaced and made hungry. We've seen with biofuels how food prices rose, shot up, and people were displaced. And we're going to see this on a far, far larger scale. Of course, it's wildly unrealistic, both technically and socially unrealistic. But it doesn't mean that in the meantime, before we discover it's not viable, there's going to be a lot of damage done in the meantime. And just briefly, the kind of technologies we're talking about is biofuels and BECCS, which is bioenergy with carbon capture and storage. So maybe I don't have time to go into the rest of it.
Maybe if people are interested, they will ask questions.
Yeah, so broadly what we need to see in the climate negotiations is language of net zero being removed, please. And also for what we propose is to have separate targets actually for cutting industrial emissions and cutting land use emissions. And if they're not actually part of the same pillar, then it means one cannot be used to offset the other. And that's what we think might be a viable approach to keep more people happy. And then the third thing might be to actually reduce our greenhouse gas emissions. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Teresa. As we are running a bit late, we will go straight to the question and have the floor ask any question. You can ask them in French, of course.
So I have a question. I have two questions. I am a teacher in sustainable development law. Now, when you talk about land grabs, what are the solutions that you would recommend? Because I think this is a danger, a very real danger for Africa. It's something that discourages the family farmers. And research doesn't filter through to the populations, but focuses more on biofuels. And I looked at your map when you showed the progress in terms of land grabs in China and India. So in most of the emerging countries, in other countries such as Saudi Arabia, this brings to mind a lot of questions, especially because back home, at least at the beginning of it, the land had a community statute and was considered sacred. So the second thing is, I'm working on the Green Fund. The Green Fund is supposed to be giving 200 billion by 2020 and it's only given 10 billion so far, which is quite a modest sum. Now, in terms of its makeup, I don't think that it hasn't been done in a democratic way. Green management is managed by the World Bank officially, but I think there's other financial backers. But what about civil society and small farming communities, those that manage the local communities that are actually in touch with the real needs of people? They're not represented. The Green Fund over the next few years is going to be increasingly important when it comes to the fight against global warming and sustainable development. Thank you. So I'm also going to tell you the two questions we got from Twitter. What would the panel say when we're asked to trust Unilever and Nestle for food security and climate change? And then the second question is, what are the limits in terms of carbon sequestration in the soil with rain fluctuation and global warming?
And potential solutions. Maybe Teresa?
Thanks. I may try to have a go at all of these questions, if that's okay. So what are the solutions to land grabbing? This is a very difficult question, and I probably don't have all the answers here. I wish my colleagues that worked more directly on land grabs were here and could help answer. But I think a major thing is we have to really look at the drivers of land grabbing. Because a lot of these grabs really are coming from the north. If we look at biofuels and now perhaps this new push for this new future push for bioenergy with carbon capture and storage and a scaling up of biofuels, that will be a driver, and we need to address those. And I think that overall, perhaps this links with the question about Unilever and Nestle. I think overall we need to stop relying on the corporate sector or the private sector to deliver solutions. We need to have actually regulations rather than voluntary initiatives that are probably going to be so that people hope the market will help solve all these questions. And in terms of the question about the Green Climate Fund, very good and quite complex question, how to ensure inclusion of the farmers' voices in the Green Climate Fund. There's a tiny, tiny window at the moment, which is on the Green Climate Fund, there are just two civil society observers. And one of those is my ActionAid colleague. He does his very best, I promise you. And he's actually really pushing for when countries, for example, in Africa, apply for Green Climate Fund money, that they must do a multi-stakeholder participatory process to ensure that the potentially affected communities are involved in any project proposals that go forward. Now, that's not going to be the full part of the solution, but at least it's one of the parts of the solution. But very much engagement on the ground and pushing at national level for multi-stakeholder processes that can determine those projects will be a key factor going forward. What are the limits of carbon sequestration? One of the problems is that carbon sequestration in the soil is actually reversible. But unfortunately, a lot of the time, people treat any carbon saved in the soil or even in the trees and forests as equal to emission cuts. But they're not. If you actually cut emissions, that is actually emissions that aren't there. If you sequester them in a tree or in the soil, then you can always cut down that tree or you can always plough the soil again. So these aren't equivalent, but they're being treated as equivalent, and that's one of the problems. So agroecology, yes, is a mitigation solution. However, we should be very wary of counting this in numbers as a mitigation solution because it's so reversible. So I would say, yes, talk about it, the strategy on the ground and in the field, but really treat it as an adaptation approach, and then any other mitigation benefits you get from it, are just a bonus, but don't count them.
Thanks. I don't have to tell the numbers now. Thanks for that. No, but I think on the carbon sequestration, I think the only thing we can perhaps look at relative things between different practices. Perhaps this is informative for the person who made the question. You can reduce or mitigate by working, for instance, on the diet of livestock. You can do it by working on the pastures where livestock graze. You can do it by changing your agricultural practices, and you can do it by working on natural areas. Now, for instance, if we work on natural areas, the potential is 100 times more than on agriculture. So the major driver for agriculture, although agriculture has a huge area, is not necessarily to mitigate, but to adapt to climate change. The reason why we want more carbon in the soil is we want to reduce vulnerability, because more carbon in the soil means more soil structure and more capacity to store water. So that's the primary concern about having carbon in the soil, to make agriculture less vulnerable to climate variability.
Yeah, thank you. I wanted to share my experience about the land grabbing. It's a very complex question, and I am not going to give you an answer. However, I am going to share the experience that we have been getting from Latin America, working with women parliamentarians. Women parliamentarians are very concerned in Latin America about land grabbing, and they have been promoting change of legislation. So there is in Central America and in Latin America there has been a huge push for new legislation that are including the right to food, and that they are looking into food and nutrition security. And within these policies, they are some issues that are accounting for the right to land as well. And these women parliamentarians are taking care of communal lands that may be prone for land grabbing, to make sure that these communal lands are secure through legislation, through legislative process within these communities, and also to make sure that there are inherit processes that give the right to land in the same way to women and to men. So, this is experience. It's not the total solution, but it's experience of something that is working in Latin America and in Central America. Thank you.
So I'll just share an experience of, it's not exactly the land grabbing in the context we are speaking now, but in India there have been recently cases where entire mountains allocated to large, powerful mining groups, the allocations were turned down just because the community got together. They had a sort of a referendum, a whole process, and there was a legislation to back them that they had the right over their land. And though the threat still persists, as we come to know that now the focus is another mountain nearby, but the institutions, as long as they are strong, so we should also place some faith in the community institutions to take over such issues, and at the same time maintain the dignity of farming as an occupation, because they are not keeping land for us. They have to value the land, and we have to support them to get the desired value from their land.
Thank you. So I will just conclude because we are running out of time. I think if we need to remember two things, because the next panelist will discuss about what needs to be in the agreement. Yeah. Oh, there are other questions. Oh, sorry. We have some time. So.
Bonjour. Je ne veux pas.
So hi, my name is Florence Sandag, and I work at the Platform for Equitable Trade, and I'd like to thank you for your words, which are very inspiring and very complimentary. And I have a question, which is an open question to whoever wants to answer it. I can fully identify with what you said and what was said this morning, that there are two roads to follow when it comes to meeting challenge of climate change. So we can go down the road of public policy, but there are also private initiatives which are already being implemented and a little bit throughout the world. So the question that I want to ask is, what are we doing today to ensure that these private initiatives of Agri Ecology and sustainable development, that they are economically viable? The cost of non-sustainable agriculture is borne by society, is carried by society, and is not taken into account in the price of a product, for example. So today, as things stand, how is the cost of sustainable agriculture integrated, and how are these solutions made economically viable, and how can we spread them on a larger scale? Any other questions?
I'm a student at the College of the Atlantic in Bar Harbor, Maine. And my question is directed mainly towards Pablo, but I would love to hear answers from the entire panel. So I took an Agri Ecology course at the beginning of this year, and we looked a lot at smaller farms and the success of agro-ecological principles within these smaller farms, and also ag in the middle farms. And so I'm wondering your thoughts on how successful we can be by implementing agro-ecological principles within larger farming systems, or if we need to completely redesign so we can integrate these principles successfully.
Gracias. Bueno, no quiero monopolizar la palabra, ya que ya tuve mi tiempo de intervención, pero...
So thank you. I don't want to take up too much time because I already had time to be on stage and express myself, but I wanted to just grab this opportunity to tell you about what's happening in Colombia. 3 topics were spoken about by Pascal, and I wanted to make a link to the proposals that you made, which I thought were very important. The framework, the UN Framework Agreement, and the experts speak about environmental discourse. They speak about social movements. And what we see happening is that we're starting to speak about climate-smart agriculture. There's a whole series of technical aspects that it entails. But what I want to say after Pascal's presentation, and something, okay, I'd like to just thank him for what he said, but and raise some points which I thought were important. He mentioned 3 important points. That firstly, we need more significant funding. We need greater resources attributed to the southern countries. We need PPPs, private and public sector partnerships. And he also said that we need to have reconversion processes and reforestation processes. So when it comes to the funding, what I suggest to those who will be participating at COP, we need to take a closer look at corruption and the problem of corruption, because we have resources to deal with these topics. Given the high level of corruption, very often we don't even know where the money is going. And sometimes there isn't even a positive outcome in the field. It's the consulting agencies that don't implement necessarily what they set out to do, what they said they would do. Now, when it comes to reconversion and reforestation, when we talk about net zero emissions, sometimes the calculations can be a little bit perverse. They take into account zero emissions. They say zero emissions is an achievable objective, and like Teresa justly said, it's not necessarily true. And so not only are we carrying on emitting gases, but by calculations, we've got single crops to capture the carbon. There are agrofuel processes. And in France, we'd like to restore 20 million hectares by 2020. So which is quite worrying, because what we realize is that these net reductions will give rise to a lot more emissions in reality. And there was also speak of alliances between different corporations.
Tenemos elementos tan graves en Colombia como que se entregan licencias ambientales express, es decir, rápidamente a proyectos.
What's happening is licenses or authorizations are handed out to extraction companies.
Pero además tenemos un caso
and the citizens' implication in that is limited. The participation of the citizens is limited. And over the last 6 years, I don't know whether you know or not, but there were over 5,000 children that died in a particular region where there were a lot of subsidies for mining operations and children that died from malnutrition. I don't know if you were aware of that fact. The state should have been using this money to promote education, etc. So the state isn't always playing the game necessarily either. And the corporations and multinational companies through these partnerships is something that's risky in the Colombian context, because there are certain practices that aren't above board and that are currently being developed, and we're really concerned about that.
To answer it. So
maybe I can answer both questions in one go, because I think, I want to give the example of the Triodos Bank. Sorry to make it's also my bank where I have my money in the Netherlands, which is a bank that invests only in sustainable projects, and in agriculture they invest only in biological farming. No. Hello? Oh. So they invest only in biological farming. It's one of the fastest growing banks, the fastest growing bank in the Netherlands. investing only in green. And when they invest in agroecology and biological farming, they're not talking only to smallholder farmers. They're investing in the Netherlands where the farmers are large. And, there are technologies possible. We have the technical knowledge to develop technologies which are mechanizable, things like those. But you need the scale. You need the clients to buy that technology. So it's possible, but it requires some investments. If I can do it in 1 minute.
Thank you.
Maybe I will talk about the question on looking at where the money goes. And just to echo what I talked about earlier on the accountability mechanisms at national and community level for looking at issues like, when the money comes through the Green Climate Fund, for example. We're trying to learn a lot from projects we have, for example, in Bangladesh and Malawi with ActionAid, where communities, especially the women, have set up institutions, built their capacity to understand what it is, understand and articulate what they want on adaptation and disaster risk reduction, and then they go to their local and their national governments and ask them where they have been spending their budgets. And that always raises very interesting questions and often immediate results in terms of how budget is spent. So we think that actually introducing civil society engagement and accountability mechanisms for these financial flows will really help to build trust, because money does need to come from North and South. It's an issue of justice, at this COP. But of course, people are voicing concerns that, it'll all go and be, spent on, by corrupt people. Well, we need to do what we can as civil society to make it accountable on the ground.
Thank you. On the comment that you made about now being, how many children you mentioned that they were suffering from hunger and malnutrition. One of the issues that we can see is that there is a total policy incoherence. Then, I don't know if any of you have been in the meeting that was organized by FAO, ICN2. It was like Rio plus 20, but 20 years after nutrition. And they were talking very highly about the incoherence between the agriculture and the health sector. But nobody spoke at that point about the incoherence of the agriculture, the health and the environment and social protection policies. So to respond to your question, because this is being led by policies that are allowing these mining enterprises, that one of the main issues is to promote policy coherence, because in Colombia there are excellent cash transfers, safety nets, that they may account to avoid all the problems that you have presented, and that we know that they work in Colombia. So it's surprising that this is not working, and probably it's because in that area, due to the distortion that mining enterprises made in areas, there is a policy incoherence. And I think that policy coherence between, again, the health sector, the agriculture sector, and the environment sector, and within the climate agenda is critical.
Bharati, you want to have a last word? You have 30 seconds.
I'll just speak on the scaling up of sustainable ecology solutions. So, at the field level, I think the use of technology is one area which we should definitely explore, because we are seeing in India that the spread of good solutions is faster when we use the technology, at the same time realizing that there is a gender dimension to the technology, and who holds which devices and controls them is what we have to keep in mind. But at a larger level, at the national level, creating the right kind of evidence so that your package of solutions is incorporated as a public program offers an opportunity for scaling up very fast.
Thank you, Bharati. So maybe the two things that I will ask the next panel to consider will be the participation of all the communities we are working with that are not represented in the UNFCCC, and that need to have a voice there, because I think that we said it this morning, but the farmers we see in the UNFCCC are not the one we are working with most of the time. So if we really want to have sustainable agriculture or agroecology to be more developed, maybe we need to think more about participation and representativity. And another thing that maybe I take away from the panel is about having a more integrated approach and to think about the principle more than the objectives, even if they are important. We need to look how we are going to achieve this kind of objective. We have seen a lot of false solutions. So if we don't define the principles, then the solution will not be good. So we have seen a lot of principles being developed there. So I hope you will remind them for the next panel. Yeah. Thank you very much.